Good morning, good afternoon, East Coast International Church. Listen, if you did not get a chance to silence your cell phone, now is a great time to do that. I also want to wish you a happy firework weekend, everybody. The rest of the country may celebrate Independence Day on July 4th, but most of us here in Lynn have already been celebrating for a long time. Maybe you haven't, but your neighbors sure have, right? Now, tomorrow we want to invite you to join us at 7 o'clock. We're going to gather at the flagpoles at Red Rock Park for our city's fireworks celebration. You can bring your own chairs, towels, snacks to share. It really is a great time of connection for us as a church. The weather, apparently there might be thunderstorms, apparently maybe a little hail, who knows. Nature might have her own firework display, but if there are any changes, we're going to keep an eye out on what the city of Lynn says for tomorrow, and we'll let you guys know via text message. So just keep an eye out for that, all right? Now, Pastor Emily and Pastor David shared a little bit about Genesis, but as we jump in, one thing that is clear to me is that Genesis is weird. As we continue this journey through the book, I just want to be honest with you that Pastor Kurt, he did us dirty. He said, you know what, I'm going to be out of the country. You guys talk about Genesis. And the reason I say that is because if you haven't read it before, there is a lot that is weird and just straight up uncomfortable. Things that I really hope that as we continue with this series, I do not have to say out loud from the stage, right? But it is really helpful for us to acknowledge as we jump into this that a part of the weirdness is that some of what you read comes from cultural customs from another part of the world at another period of time in human history. And whether people come from this side of the planet or the other, whether they're around today or centuries ago, people are weird and do weird things, right? So if as you begin your reading, it is weird to you, it's weird to me too, so that's okay. It is also helpful to know that much of the Old Testament is descriptive, not prescriptive. This means, just like Pastor Emily had shared, is that it is describing what happens and isn't necessarily a manual of what should happen. For example, King David, he had many wives. I think there were 8. This may be helpful for you to know, but not helpful for you to do. Now, the book of Genesis is not moral stories or Aesop's fables, if you know what those are, but rather a history of God's plans for his people and a roadmap to Jesus. Yeah. Last week, Pastor David killed it. So he did so good. I was here for 2 services. I said, let's go for a third. He brought a really encouraging and challenging message as he shared with us about Abram and how God gave him a promise. I'm going to pick up where he left off and talk to you about waiting for the promise. Yeah. You see, God had promised Abram that he would not be just a father, but that he would be the father, that his offspring would be many, and yet Abram found himself childless, and he and his wife were elderly. Genesis chapter 15, verse 5, the promise is written that says this, "Count the stars, that's how many descendants you will have." Now, how in the world would Abram be a great nation, which was to be born from someone's offspring and legacy, when he had none and presumably would not and could not? At face value, God made a promise with Abram alone. However, it takes 2 to tango, and his wife Sarai, who was also elderly, would somehow be involved, right? You would think so. Except Sarai knows her biological clock wasn't just not ticking anymore, but it would have been, how do we put this nicely? Expired? Extinct? DUN done? So as Abram and Sarai await their promise, the voice of God doesn't seem quite so loud. How many of you know that the voice of others can sometimes seem so right when waiting on God seems so wrong? Genesis 16 verse 2 says, "So Sarai said to Abram," she has some advice for him, "The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abram agreed with Sarai's proposal. The ESV translation says, Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Listen, it be your own people sometimes. The people who love you, they may try to help you, but actually in the end turn out to be really unhelpful. Does that ever happen to anybody here? Friends, we need to be careful whose voices we allow to influence us as we wait on God. You see, Sarai was his wife, his beloved. She probably meant well. Sarai probably had his best interest in mind, probably really wanted to make him feel good, but none of that made what she said right. And sometimes, it's not the voice of others, but the voice of culture that influences us as we wait on God. At this time in history, because Hagar was a slave, she was viewed as property, not as a person. What culture said to do in these circumstances was exactly what Sarai suggested, for the slave owner to use slaves for reproductive purposes. But culture is still trying to tell us what to do as we wait on God today, but that doesn't make it right. I know that oftentimes as we wait on provision, culture will tell us, go play the lottery, get a scratch ticket, go to Encore, lie a little here, cheat a little there. You can tithe when you're rich, no problem. Debt is king, right? Wrong. And oftentimes as we wait for peace, culture will tell us, you know what, go to the nearest dispensary, it's legal now. Or, listen, I became a mom last year, and the craziest thing to me is this mommy wine thing is very real. I have not been to a single gathering with mothers where this is not a major part of what they do. Just because everyone else does it doesn't make it right. Or, culture will also tell you, hard stuff, you gotta wait, just go scroll, doom scroll till your thumb falls off, let gaming be your peace, or Netflix, or TikTok, or this, or that. There's always something new, right? But just because culture tells us doesn't mean it's right. And the thing that's important for us to know, friends, is that our impatience has an impact. There can be a physical impact, financial, mental, social, spiritual, even generational impact for our impatience. I'll tell you, when I got braces, maybe 10 years ago, I can't do the math, but those of you guys who know me now, you may not know, my teeth were jacked up, but these babies cost $5,000. They're beautiful, beautiful. Feldman Orthodontics. But listen, when I had my braces, towards the end of your time, I had a payment plan. Towards the end of the time, every time I would go, the receptionist would ask me, are you ready to make your final payment? Are you ready to make your final payment? And I had many final payments left. But I was so scared that they were going to keep the braces on me. They would never take them off. I'm going to be stuck with all this stuff in my mouth. It's going to be crazy. And so one day, finally, I go there, and she said, are you ready to make your final payment? And I had my credit card for emergency purposes, and I said, charge it. That bad boy took me 8 years to pay off. 8 years. Because instead of being patient, right, instead of waiting and doing it time after time after time, I just jumped. My impatience had a financial impact. It happens also, you think of Veruca Salt in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, who says, Daddy, I want a golden goose. Or, for those of you guys who are a little bit younger, I want a squirrel, and I want it now. She wants it so bad that she ends up in the abyss of Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, never to be seen again, right? Or, last week I went swimming, I got water in my ear. It was really bugging me, and I know it's going to clear on its own because that's what water does. And if I would just wait, it probably would clear it up really quickly, right? Well, I woke up at 3 in the morning. My ear was bugging me. All I could hear was the water. And listen, I went to CVS, 3 in the morning. I spent so much money buying all these things to put in my ear just to get that water out. And if I had just waited, I probably would not have spent Saturday deaf for the whole day because I just kept plugging it with more and more stuff. And it's the things that we turn to in our impatience that become the things that keep us from receiving the promise in the first place. Amen. How many of you know when we're distracted, we can miss what's right in front of us? This happens to a lot of people when you drive, or I used to take the MBTA all the time, take the bus in the city, and I would get distracted. I'd miss my stop. You know how many extra years of my life I felt like I spent on the MBTA just because I wasn't paying attention. Now, unfortunately for Abram, Sarai, and Hagar, their impatience had a far-reaching, generationally negative impact that some people believe we're still dealing with to this day. In Genesis chapter 16, verses 4 through 6, it says, So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress Sarai with contempt. Then Sarai said to Abram, This is all your fault. I put my servant in your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. Abram replied, Look, she's your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. How passive, right? Then Sarai treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. This is a good reminder that this is descriptive, not prescriptive, right? Amen. See, the unfortunate thing is that their impatience, it impacted more than just them. These people are crazy, right? The more I read this, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, poor Hagar. These people, I am so glad I don't live then, right? And as much as you can say these people are crazy, the question that I really want to ask is, where is God in all of this? See, where is God? God sought Hagar. In the midst of this horrible situation, God is searching for Hagar. It says, the angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a spring of water in the wilderness along the road to Shur. I'm not great with maps, but every map I studied said that this is well over 50 miles away. Now, just to remind you, she was a slave and she was pregnant, which means that she probably didn't have any belongings of her own, any way to get there. She didn't leave with permission. She just got her stuff. She was out of there. 50 miles is really far for someone who's not pregnant to walk. Can you imagine 50 miles pregnant in the wilderness? So homegirl, she's pregnant. She got over 50 miles away in the wilderness. And even in the wilderness, God finds her there at a random spring because God sought her. See, it's because what we don't see at first glance when we read this is that Hagar is Egyptian, and this is the God of Israel, who normally, throughout Genesis, you will see that God's chosen people were the Israelites. And this is our first glimpse of Jesus. Because was it not Jesus who spent his entire life going out of his way to people that nobody would pay attention to, everyone would write off, and he would go to them to say, you are my child, right? And so this is actually the very first time that an angel of the Lord appears in the book of Genesis. And it's not to one of God's chosen people. Actually, according to the Israelite customs of the time, as a slave who ran away, she would also be considered a sinner doing something illegal. And yet, God sought her. This was because to God, she wasn't a slave, but she was his daughter. And one of my favorite things about this is that, as this is one of the first glimpses that God's love and care extends beyond the Israelites. Because even today, God is still seeking people. In your pain and challenges, God is seeking you out. Now, not only is Hagar sought after by God, but Hagar is seen by God. God saw Hagar. You know, I picked up my kids in a random market basket of like a month or so ago before church on a Wednesday night, and I was thinking, they'll stay in the car, I'm going to run in, grab some dinner, and run back out, right? We'll be at Bible study in no time. So I go inside, get my grocery store sushi, check out, make my way back to the car when I see this sign held up by some 7-year-old hands. If you can't read 7-year-old-ese, this says, please help us, Mila Mika. These two little girls almost had Homeland Security on the scene. And I was like, man, I'm about to be page 1 of the item. I'm going to be the one talking about on the Real You Know You from Lynn. It's going to be crazy, right? And see, I was like, I'm going to go do this. Gentle parenting. Let's go. Okay. Why would you do this? I asked them. And you know what they said? We wanted to see if anyone would see it. I don't know what they would have done if anyone did, but thank God if somebody saw it, they didn't do anything about it because they were fine, right? But how many times in life when we're going through something, we're just like, would anyone see it? Does anyone see me? But God sees Hagar, and God sees you. In 16, verse 8 through 11, the angel said to her, Hagar, Sarai's servant. Just want to pause here. Not only does the angel know exactly who he's talking to, he knows exactly who she is, what she does in life. He knows that this is Hagar, Sarai's servant. God knows us, right? But then he asks, where have you come from? Where are you going? It's like the Cotton Eye Joe over here. She says, I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. Then he added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. The angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears, for the Lord has heard your cry of distress. Verse 13, thereafter Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord who had spoken to her. She said, you are the God who sees me. You are the God who sees me. She also said, have I truly seen the one who sees me? Do you know this is the first time someone in the Bible gives a name to God? And it's not one that you would expect. God saw Hagar in her situation and her distress, and he sees you and I as well. He is the God who sees. So what does Hagar do? Hagar surrenders to God's plan. Ugh, surrender. I hate that word. Terrible word. Anyone else like me, you're allergic to surrender? Anyone else? Like, I'll take a Zyrtec for that, right? See, I'll tell you, when I had to get my wisdom teeth out, the anesthesiologist, I got my wisdom teeth out a separate time. I had to get other teeth for my braces, and both times these people were so funny because they're like, all right, count back from 10. So I count back from 10. I said, give me more. I would not go down. Pastor Emily came with me one time, and I was holding her hand, and the guy was like, all right, you can leave now. And she was like, I don't think she can. I don't think I can. And I held that hand until I couldn't any longer. But I hate surrender. But what's wild to me is that none of what's going on with Hagar is actually her fault. And when God finds her, he doesn't like sit with her and hug her, say, here's some money, go on your way. Like that's what I would do. If I were with Hagar, I'd be like, it's okay, girl, go, run like the wind, bullseye. You're right, those people are crazy. Don't go back, sis. Keep going, let's go, right? But that's not what God does. See, God saw Hagar, and he challenges her and instructs her on what to do next, right? He says, return to your mistress, submit to her authority. And I'm sure this wasn't easy to do. Not only is she running away from the assault and all the difficulty of the abuse of that situation, she's pregnant, she's gone over 50 miles, she's in the wilderness, and yet God says, go back? That's crazy. I'm going to invite the worship team to come on up. See, she had been assaulted by Abram, forced to carry his child, treated terribly, and finally, she gets away, except God says, go back. What's crazy to me is that she did. Because she knew she wasn't alone in her situation, and neither are you. No matter the situation, we are seen by God. We are seen by God. And if you trust him, he will carry you through it.
Yes, he will.
Running away is very rarely the right thing to do. Hear me, I'm not saying if you're being abused that you should sit back and take it. Absolutely not. But many of us find ourselves in difficult situations, and rather than wait on God to strengthen us and resolve the situation, we'd rather run away, leave, avoid the situation. But if we'd trust that God sees us and be willing to surrender to his plans, we'd see his blessings as well. I'm going to invite you to stand up on your feet today. See, there are times in our journey with Jesus that we may be going through it as we wait on God. And God wants us to be patient because he is working on our behalf. If we have faith and we trust in him and surrender to his plans, we will get to see the blessing on the other side. James 1:12 says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, can you guys say afterward? Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. This verse that punches me in the spirit, James 1:2-4, says, Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be perfect and complete, needing nothing. I know that in my walk with God, there are times where it'd be so much easier to not have to obey God in the waiting or surrender to his plans. 1 Samuel 15:22 is something that God spoke to me at a very specific time in my life. You see, when I was 16, I found myself homeless, jumping from couch to couch, dealing with my own life, trying to figure out my plans in this really unfortunate situation. And I was lucky enough that my academic pursuits, I got a scholarship, full ride scholarship to go to a college here in Boston. You say woohoo, let me tell you. And I found Jesus, and he told me to go to Bible college, which was a private school that would not give me full tuition, and I had no way to figure this out. I was praying about it, and I found this verse that says, what is more pleasing to the Lord? Your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Listen, obedience is. See, I was in the situation where I had to choose, what am I going to do? Am I going to choose the easy way, that way that looks like a blessing, or will I obey? And because I obeyed, it was hard. I worked my tail off in college. I had 10 jobs at one point just trying to figure it all out. But the day I got to give them that final payment, was a day that I saw our God provides, right? If we would walk out in obedience, if we would surrender, we would be able to see the blessing on the other side. So my friends, as we get to sing this last song, if you need God's strength to help you to wait well or to help you walk in obedience, I want to invite you to come to pray at the altar, to give it to God, and to receive the grace that you need today. So we're going to sing this.